With more and more publications cutting back or shutting down, the news industry is experimenting with new ways to survive. Hyperlocal, as well as collaborative efforts, are part of the new trend in coverage. Ownership by nonprofit organizations is being explored as an alternative business model. With me to discuss nonprofits in the news industry is Walter Fields, publisher of City Limits. Also joining me is independent magazine editor Abby Sher. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get into the discussion, let's look at this report by Michelle Garcia on a new news model in the Bronx.
When you come to these meetings, you see the same people. They really care. They've been here for 30 years.
Oh, girl, let it go.
I'm Rachel Waltoltz, and I'm the only reporter for the Tremont Tribune, and so I'm here covering the community board meeting.
For example, the MTA.
Take one reporter in the South Bronx and another in the Kingsbridge section, papers in Mott Haven and Hunts Point, and you have the Bronx News Network, a collaboration of not-for-profit community newspapers.
And everyone from these papers can and does post to the blog. Then we have feeds from other Bronx blogs here on RSS feeds. Occasionally we have video on the blog as well.
A daily news article about cuts to a homeless prevention program only told you part of the story.
The Norwood News, with the backing of their nonprofit patron, Moshulu Preservation Corporation, searched for partner papers like the Hunts Point Express and even pollinated a few new ones, including the Tremont Tribune.
Most Bronx neighborhoods have no spotlight on its civic stage.
In the run-up to the City Council's decision on the fate of the massive abandoned armory, a critical public space issue for the Kingsbridge community, the Bronx News Network became an outlet for informing other Bronx neighborhoods about the looming real estate issue and the jobs at stake for borough residents.
This is about the Kingsbridge Armory, and we posted this right before the hearing. It's sort of like an overview and what to expect. And actually, I know that folks read it because I got an earful from some of the folks who were working on this, that they didn't agree with something that I said. And that's great. That's what we want. We want folks to care about it and read it every day.
Full disclosure, 2 of the newspapers for the Bronx News Network are produced by CUNY students.
What the Bronx News Network is doing, where they're sharing resources, where they have, one back-end office that all the different newspapers operate out of. They share their content with each other. That's exactly what's happening in the leading investigative journalism projects in the country right now. The NPR and the Center for Investigative Journalism, they're trying to figure out that model for themselves.
Still, for all the similarities, there's a big difference between the Bronx News Network and large news organizations.
Communities who haven't been covered are able to bring their own voice to counter images of their community in the media or lack of those images. I don't think that news organizations, they haven't learned the lesson about really deeply reflecting on perhaps the populations that they haven't been covering because they haven't had to learn it.
But it's a big challenge for networks, big and small, to make their collaborations financially viable.
It's not economical to do it unless you have a very large network, meaning that you've aggregated thousands and thousands of sites and you can link them all together and deliver relevant ads.
And there's another issue. The sometimes uneasy marriage between news outlets and their nonprofit funders. Moss says a critical housing story that appeared in the Mount Hope Monitor provoked criticism from its sponsor, the Mount Hope Housing Company.
It's not an issue. It's something to constantly be vigilant about. But it's always hard. I mean, anyone that says that it's not hard is not telling you the truth.
The final arbiter, though, of nonprofit and collaborative experiments is the community that decides with its eyeballs how well it works for them. For Independent Sources, I'm Michelle Garcia.
Walter, let's start with you. You just recently bought the City Limits. City Limits is interesting in the sense that it was founded as a nonprofit. Still, it has had some of its share of problems. Where do you want to take it?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is more of what we've always done. being a solid investigative journalism magazine and website, and increase the frequency of our reporting. You know, we're going to remain a not-for-profit organization. It was purchased by the Community Service Society, one of the New York City's oldest not-for-profits and one of the nation's not-for-profits of standing on issues of poverty. But I think for City Limits, it's a real opportunity. Despite the unease today in news media, I think it's a very exciting time. I think we have an opportunity to experiment and to explore and to try to find the right business model for this magazine and website, and that's what we work towards every day.
Okay. For instance, you said you're going to change the frequency. What is it now? And
it's currently a quarterly magazine. At one time, it was actually a monthly, but now we're going to go to a bi-monthly publication schedule, so the frequency will change. The look of it will change.
To what?
Bi-monthly every 2 months.
Okay.
The look of it will change. I think people will be very surprised when they see our first edition roll off the print next year. It will be a much different looking City Limits. And we're also reinvigorating our website to coordinate it better with the magazine. So part of it is look and feel, but part of it is digging deeper in stories and subjects that we've always covered, but now having more resources to do that.
Okay. Abby, you've worked in nonprofit your entire professional career. You've worked at nonprofit magazines just recently now up in Boston. Can nonprofit work? Can that model work?
Well, I'm very interested to hear that you want to invigorate the resources of City Limits, having written for City Limits back in the 90s. It's always been strapped, and the nonprofit model is, as Jordan Moss said in your segment, is very challenging. I work for a nonprofit think tank right now that tracks the American right wing. I'm just leaving there as editor of their quarterly, and experts on the right wing, but our lawyer told us during the election year we couldn't really cover the election because our very focus on the right meant that we were partisan. So even though we had great information about various candidates, we had to basically shut down part of our news operation in the area where we were most vitally needed. And the challenge of nonprofit publishing in an increasingly partisan media environment is that you're gagged on certain issues at certain moments.
Speaking of that, Walter, this is one of the criticism of this model. For instance, even in Michelle Garcia's piece, the Bronx News Network had a conflict with the Moshula Corporation, which owns the newspapers. Is this model a PR tool for these organizations?
Not necessarily. The Community Service Society made a commitment that it would operate City Limits as an independent news organization. In fact, come July 1st, it'll be spun off separately and will have its own board. The funding has been provided by the Community Service Society, and we're seeking foundation support. I think the only way this model really works is a combination of earned income, advertising revenue, and they're going to have to be subsidized. I don't think any of these entities will exist amongst themselves simply by advertising revenue. It's not going to happen. You really have to be subsidized, and that's the model we're working with. I think our intention is to run an organization that may, at the end of the year, break even or have a small fund balance as a not-for-profit. But I don't think we're fooling ourselves thinking that we are going to run sort of a major news organization in the old model. The old model is dead, and that's why newspapers are dying on the vine. I think not-for-profits have to find a clever combination of advertising revenue, subsidies, as well as maybe some e-commerce also, that will allow them to survive.
Okay. Is there a conflict of interest inherent in this model as well?
Yes. As Jordan said, anyone who says there's not, I mean, probably hasn't been vigorous enough in their reporting in a certain area. And I mean, I also realize that you may not necessarily have a lot of choice, that you might need a organization as powerful as a Community Service Society for City Limits to survive. That City Limits would require an institution with your foundation connections to sustain it, and infrastructure. Because one of the challenges of nonprofit publishing is usually they're just a single publication. You're extremely taxed with your staffing. And another thing that's happening in nonprofit magazine publishing right now is the loss of subscription revenue because of the web. So they have their own version of the collapse that's going on in the mainstream media. You're having subscription collapse, where a reliable revenue source used to be paid subscriptions for your magazine, and you would borrow $100,000 for a direct mail campaign. You'd bring in subscribers, and those subscribers would pay back over time with donations and subscription revenue. And that is no longer really operating because people who are readers of the nonprofit press are going to the web. So you need even more. No nonprofit magazine probably survives without some foundation support. Although I worked for one, Dollars and Cents, that continues to exist because it publishes economics readers that are used in college classrooms. So public policy readers coming out of city limits that can be used in public policy schools.
Well, Walter, I'd like to pick up on a point that Abby mentioned earlier about the challenge of having one title publication and how difficult that is. With city limits, how do you generate money? Do you have a plan to generate money through subscription?
We currently do, and we currently get advertising. We currently get classified advertising. The question is, how far can you go in building the enterprise with what your current revenue stream? I think what's important to remember here is that we're no longer looking at City Limits as a magazine and a website. City Limits is a content platform. So the old model of this wall between the two, you have to abolish. I think that's what we're seeing in the for-profit media, that you're beginning to more think about a content platform where you can provide content, sell it perhaps online. That's a new model that people are still looking at, whether or not people will ever pay for online content. Wall Street Journal does, but they have a very defined audience, most of which is subsidized by their companies for subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal. But I think what we're in is a period of extreme experimentation to find out which model actually works. And those conflicts are inherent across platforms. So even in so-called mainstream media, if you look at GE owning NBC, those conflicts are always there. There's no such thing as pure journalism. What we have in the not-for-profit side, though, is the bigger challenge in that you're not revenue driven, and the fact that you don't have the same ability as a New York Times or a Daily News to drive revenue. But I do think that there is a place for not-for-profit media. And so when we look across the country, whether it's Christian Science Monitor, there are some examples out there of people struggling to try to find the correct model.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and we have to leave it at that. Abby Sher and Walter Fields, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Chika Onyeani has had a long and varied career in journalism. He's a newspaper publisher, radio personality, and author. Adeola Oladele talked with a Nigerian newsman about coverage of African countries and communities in the U.S.
African Enquirer was established in 1978. It was modeled after the old National Enquirer.
At that time, there was no newspaper that was geared towards the African community. There are many things that we cover that the mainstream media, they don't even know is happening in our community.
After 2 years of experimenting with different names, in 1980, the African Enquirer changed to the African Sun-Times. It covered stories from various African countries, as well as from African communities here in the U.S. So what kind of feedbacks are you getting from people?
As the owner, I would say positive. Of course, there are people who sometimes are not happy with some of the things we write.
The 66-year-old says living outside his country gives him freedom to write about African controversial issues.
If I was in Nigeria or Gambia, I might be in jail already.
Onyeani is originally from Nigeria. In 2005, he started hosting a weekly show on All Africa Radio, where he discusses African controversial issues.
This is Straight Talk with Chika Onyeani on the All Africa Radio, Sunu Afrique. We try to fight the kind of information that is portrayed about Africa, which is always negative.
Since the 2-hour show began on Friday nights, it has empowered African communities in the ethnic media.
The African community, we have come of age. We have over 600,000 Africans in the metropolitan area.
After 9/11, Onyani moved African Sun-Times from downtown Manhattan to his home in New Jersey.
So we moved there, and now, because of the downtown, people are saying they can't advertise as well.
He likens the recent economic downturn to his experience in 2001.
You know, people started saying, oh, we are contributing to 9/11 victims, so we can't advertise.
Not only that, the paper is being challenged by digital convergence like other newspapers. Despite these challenges, he's encouraged by the positive feedback he gets from the readers. Now, he's thinking of adding multimedia components to the paper's website. For independent sources, I'm Adeola Oladile.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.